Dr. Marcus, this month has been fairly busy for the country of China. And I'm sure that you noticed not only that just 2 days ago that China successfully wrapped up the Winter Olympics. And I think, to be fair, that the athletes across the continent thoroughly enjoyed this type of unification or this type of unity through sports. And also, meanwhile, as we discussed before the show, that this year actually played another significant role between China and US, which is marked the 50th anniversary for Richard Nixon, the former US president, actually made the first trip to China in the year of 1972. But meanwhile, given the condition, Dr. Marcus, I'm sure that you are so knowledgeable about this, but the relationship between China and US today, oh my goodness, if I can put in a modest way, there's no comparison with the 50 years ago when Richard Nixon met up with the current leader. So maybe this question sounds so easy or sounds so silly, but I still want to ask is, do you think it's necessary that we still celebrate the 50th anniversary for China and the U.S. just for the significance of the Richard Nixon's groundbreaking trip to China? Do you think it's even necessary at this moment that we should discuss this?
Anniversaries and celebrations are always good because it makes you look into the past and look into the things that you had before and wonder why you do not have them now. I always like to say that what is the secret of happiness? You look into your happy moments, the happy moments you had in your life, and you try to reproduce them sometimes in the future, right? And you try to project some of the goals that you had in the past into the future. So I think anniversaries and celebrations are good for you to look back and see, what you did right and what you did wrong. So those dates are important in that sense, right? You do a deep analysis of where, why things are going well and where things got, distorted and things changed. So that's my impression. Now, if you look overall, I think that the balance in these 50 years between the relationship of the United States and China has really been a positive one, despite all the current problems that we have seen with the U.S. declining and China ascending, and the fact that the Americans seem not to accept this trend, which is a normal repetitious thing, in the history of humankind. And considering that China has always been the largest economy in the world, except for the last 200 or 300 years, it's a normal trend that China having the largest population now with, GDP, with capacity to consume and all that, it makes perfect sense for China to return to its position. So it's something that you should not fight it, but you should accept it and try to work around it. But overall, you saw that, this relationship has allowed China to become a major exporter of products. Now China has conquered, no matter where you go in the world, you have Chinese products. I think that one of the great contributions of Americans to China was the issue of quality control and how to produce better stuff and all that. But one thing that wasn't expected, I think that's the sweat equity of the Chinese people that made it, is that the Chinese overwork, and the Chinese, once they decide to get to somewhere, and once they set up the goal, they just work towards it. And nobody was expecting that China would really change so much over the last 50 years. But I think, you cannot take away the contribution of the United States, to this process of building up or helping or, working together with the Chinese to build up a country that is so successful. Of course, China, as a good student, has become the teacher, right? And,
that's right.
And I think that that's one of the positive things when you look into China is that first, China was walking behind and then was walking by the side, and in some areas it's walking in front of the world. And I think, that's the way things are. So when we look into this history of 50 years of relationship, we see the ups and downs. But I think that overall, at the end of the day, I think it has been a positive thing for China, and it has also been a positive thing for the United States.
Dr. Marcus, recently that based on report, I'm sure that you might also notice that the country of Argentina just joined the One Belt, One Road initiative. And so a lot of experts within this international community continue to see this growth and the fast development between the China and the Latin American countries. So from your perspective, how significant is it for the countries such as Argentina and other Latin American countries cooperate with China under this Belt and Road Initiative? And do you think that China today is taking this right strategy towards Latin American countries? When we see the relationship between the Latin American countries and the West, it's on the brink. So in other words, it's no longer effective. What is your take on that?
I believe that's a good thing. For the longest time, we had the application of the Monroe Doctrine in the Americas, which is America for the Americans. And that was 1848, I think. That's when President Monroe declared that. Now, I think that opening up the continent to another great power with whom we do not compete. Latin America can supply many of the things that the Chinese need, and it's an important thing for us to not to rely exclusively on the United States or on the Europeans. Because I always say this, and I mentioned even that in relation to Brazil, the gains that Brazil or Latin America can get from the United States and the European Union will tend to be marginal, right? There will not be major investments coming to the region from those two places in the world. But we can have substantial and exponential gains when we interact with China just because of the size of the Chinese market. And the fact that we're not competitors and we actually can learn from each other. And I think, for the process of industrialization, for, infrastructure and all those things that Latin America desperately needs, I think that China can really help a lot in the region. I always say, my favorite quote from China is "Build a road and get rich." Right? And that's one of the major challenges that Latin America has is the lack of infrastructure that does not allow the region to be more productive and all that. So I think it's a good thing. Now, in the case of Argentina is going through a major economic challenge now. A result of some of the measures that they took in the past. So they're now paying for their mistakes in the past. But the problem is that they're trying to get access to funds from the IMF, from the Americans, or they're having a hard time.
Right.
So I'm sure that when President Fernandez went to President Xi Jinping and was able to get Argentina, first of all, to join Belt and Road,
right,
and second, the promise of 23 or $27 billion in investments in infrastructure and all that, which Argentina desperately needs, like Brazil, I think it was a good thing. So it's good. I always say this, it's good to have more centers where you can actually go and play, and instead of only having one source of funding or one source of anything, right? So I think it's important to have this diversity of players, of global players that can help you in certain circumstances. So I see with good eyes the whole thing of China coming into the continent, and you can see that China has become the number one trading partner for the majority of the region. Based on the thing that I mentioned before, the gains with the US and the European Union are going to be very marginal, while with the gains with the Chinese and China can be exponential. Of course, this will create some disruption. The United States may say, "Oh, why are the Chinese playing in our own backyard and all that?" Well, that's part of life. If you really want the Chinese out, you should bring in stuff, and you should, try to replace what China is doing in an economic way, which is not going to happen.
Right.
So I think, countries, there is a quote by a former British prime minister who served twice in government. And Lord Palmerston used to say that in international relations, you have no, what is that? He says is we have no perennial friends, no perennial enemies. The only thing that is perennial is the interests, right?
Wow.
The interests are perennial. So I think that's one of the good things when we look into this whole thing, where our interests lay as countries, and if China is the country that is able to provide and to meet these interests, more
That's
power
right.
to China.
That's right, Dr. Marcus. I know you're fairly busy, but I do have two quick questions before letting you go. Now, Dr. Marcus, looking ahead in the year of 2022, and there are so many countries in Asia are coming up with elections. For example, South Korea is standing at the crossroads, and they're also facing another major election. And the country of India, and also they're going to have major election nationwide as well. So I want to know that right now, when we look at those countries, South Korea, India, and possible another countries in Asia and more, how significant do you think today that China can be one of the major factors played domestically for them? So in other words, when the voters domestically consider about their next presidential candidates, or when they're discussing these international policies, how much do you think that China matters to those countries in terms of election?
Oh, it's essential, right? Even though foreign policy is not something that the electors think about, right? The voter, when they go to vote, they're thinking more about domestic issues. And we always say, foreign policy is not the number one concern of people when they're voting. But if you think about the world and the way things are right now, where things are so intertwined, right? We have high inflation in the world because the global supply chain has been affected by it, by the pandemic and all that. So I think that when all countries go, when people go into vote, they need to think, when they think about their pockets, they need to realize also that the world needs to grow back, right? We need to go. We need to grow. We need to grow economically. And the only country that can really pull the situation now, that can really make things get back to normal, is really China and the vitality of the Chinese consumer market. So I think when you look into this situation, China is a big player. It affects the region. It's the backyard of China,
right?
For geopolitical reasons and all that, and the location, geographical location too. So when you look into that, I think that China is always a major player in the region, but not only in Asia, we have elections in Brazil too.
That's right.
And the Chinese factor is also extremely important.
Okay. Now, Dr. Marcus, the last question I want to end, it's again going back to the relationship between Brazil and China. As we mentioned before, Brazil is also gearing up for another major election. And now this time, for decades, we know that China has always been consistent in terms of foreign policy. So in other words, China is not interested in interfering or meddling any international affairs, because we know that it's so important that we believe that other countries should respect the same thing in terms of Chinese domestic affairs. Now, looking ahead, how do you think that for this year that China and Brazil can cooperate better in terms of economic partnership, and also political partnership, and also dealing with some of the major international crises?
I believe there are three things to consider, and I'll make it very quick.
Sure.
I think that number one, Brazil needs to find ways to work with China and add value to the products that it sells to China, right? because Brazil is selling commodities mostly to China. And I think it would be interesting if Brazil, together with Chinese companies or Chinese companies coming into Brazil, they add value to the products in Brazil. So, there is a positive aspect to improve the quality of your exports, the quality of your workforce. There are many benefits in that way. So I think that's issue number one. Issue number two that is also relevant is that we have to realize that China is not only the new kid on the block, but China is the most relevant player, in the block right now. And we need to find ways in which we can work together and line up our policies to meet with some of the Chinese needs so that the Chinese can correspond. And also, at the global governance aspect, we also are able to redesign some of the things that are not favorable to us. So I think that is an important aspect for us to find out the areas where we can address the issue of global governance in a way that is favorable to China, to Brazil, and also to the other minor players who do not have access to, to these big countries and all that. And the third aspect, I think, is that Brazil needs to start, and I keep saying that to Brazilians, we should treat China more as a partner than as a client, right? Because there are many people that look into China just as a country that is going to come and buy Brazilian products and all that. It's not the relationship that we should have. China is not a client of Brazil, but China should become a partner with Brazil, and we should work together to find ways in which we can exchange more trade and we can exchange more goods, we can sell more stuff, and we can also have more interaction between our peoples, because that's, I think, the essential part of building good relationship is when the Chinese get to know Brazil a little better, and when the Brazilians get to know the Chinese and China a little better, I think we can go very far away in building a solid relationship that is going to, stay for ages.